Oi, mi amor. Mission. Hello everyone and welcome back. As promised in my last video, today I'll be sharing my journey from being a freelancer to founding a creative studio. In this video, I'll be covering the key points of my journey, including how I discovered my passion for motion graphics and 3D, how I and my friends founded an agency during my undergrad, studied MA Computational Art, got recommended by my course leader for an intern position at a researching agency, landed a job at a motion graphics studio, and got fired, started working at a different studio, and finally how I took a leap of faith to freelancing and achieving my dream of founding Double Studio. Along the way, I'll be sharing how circumstances, connections, pursuing what makes you happy, and belief in oneself can lead to success, getting sick, and discovering world of VFX and 3D. Luck. I discovered my passion for VFX and 3D quite early on in my life. I got sick when I was about 12 and I had to stay home for a while, during which time I started tinkering with motion graphics and 3D design. I fell in love with the process and soon enough I began creating in my spare time as well. This eventually led me down the path of photography and cinematography. During college, I leaned heavily into arts. I bought my first camera and continued my obsession with photography, researching VFX, and even learning After Effects from the famous Video Copilot website, all on my own. It was during my final year in college that I made my mind up about wanting to go to university to study photography seriously. After spending one extra year at the college to get all the required grades to apply, I sent my application to 3 different universities in UK. One in Bristol, City of Bristol College, that was offering courses in partnership with Portsmouth University, and 2 in London, Royal College of Arts and London South Bank University. I got 2 offers, one from Bristol and one from London. At the time I was living in Bristol and wanting to experience living on my own, and especially living in London as a young adult, I've accepted the offer to study at London South Bank University, founding an agency at the university. Right place, right time, and right people. It was during my studies of BA Digital Photography that I slowly began to get an idea of what I want to do. I was really passionate about photography, but at the same time I was finding that I enjoy retouching or post-production far more than taking actual pictures. We got really lucky with our course leader Daniel, who was new to the course at the time, as he began introducing major changes to the course. He wanted the students to be prepared for the real world and get working experience while studying. It was during this time that an idea was born. What if there was a company founded within university that allowed students to get work experience and allowed them to get a taste of different roles in running a functioning business? So during the second year of my studies, we founded an agency, a business set up as a community interest company with huge help from our course leader Daniel, Clarence Center for Enterprise and Innovation, my close and dear friends who I was studying with, Lisa and Trix, as well as other students both from the current year and a year above. And thus, South Bank Collective was born, a student-led photography agency that, until this day, is still running successfully, allowing students to get experience, earn money, and also counts as a valid work experience for the course. After leaving university, we were allowed to work with the agency for another year. Since then, the students have expanded the agency's offering to filmmaking and now also includes the drama department as well, offering their students to get the acting experience through the agency. I can't emphasize enough how valuable this was for all of us and all the fun we were able to have working together. We even went to Italy to do a photo shoot for Fassi, an Italian crane manufacturer, that then featured our top 6 images in the calendar that gets sent out to all of the partners across the globe. Working with real clients early on in my career taught me a lot and gave me an understanding of how an agency works. Most importantly, it taught me that my work has value and that it can be done again. Fast forward to my final year, I was making projects with motion graphics, virtual reality, really experimenting with different mediums, as the course allowed me that kind of freedom as long as I was meeting my module criteria. And I even started to experiment with code to do my final project. That then sparked a huge interest in me for computational art and made me think that I want to pursue a master's degree. At the end of the course, we had to write our 5-year plan of what we're going to do after leaving university, which I will come back to later on in the story. But before that, let's have a change of the scenery. And we're back, studying MA Computational Art, pursuing what makes you happy. At the end of my undergrad, I began looking at my options to pursue a master's degree. I was looking at different options, such as filmmaking, 3D animation, multimedia studies, but nothing really caught my attention. Until my friend Lisa, thank you so much, suggested a course at Goldsmiths University called Computational Art. The second I read the course description, I instantly knew that it was exactly what I wanted to do. At the time, I was traveling with my mom across Russia and China on a Trans-Siberian Express. If you want to find out more about it, leave a comment down below. So it wasn't until I came back to UK that I've started gathering all of my references from my lecturers and gathering all the required information to join the course. With 2 weeks left to spare until the start of the course, and against my family's suggestions of finding a full-time job, I've decided to pursue my interests and applied for MA Computational Art. Having 2 great recommendations under my belt, I've got accepted into the course, and so I began my journey of learning how to code, solder, and make interactive artwork. Learning open frameworks, processing, tinkering with Arduino, and soldering my own electronics, and of course making lifelong friends was a dream come true. Not only did I gain an incredible wealth of knowledge, it allowed me to think differently about creative problems and solutions, and it also paved the way for me to always embrace the unknown, learn new things on the fly, and gave me an analytical way of thinking, something that comes in handy until this day. It was during that time that I understood that any new skill can be learned with enough hard work. However, I still needed to find work to pay my rent, and this is where my close connection with lecturers and my course leader was invaluable, as I got recommended for an intern position at a retouching agency. Getting recommended for an intern position at a retouching agency. Connections. As I began my course, I was still looking for work, and getting recommended for a job at a high-end retouching agency seemed like a great fit. However, I soon realized that majority of my work was administration, as well as making coffees, taking out rubbish, getting prints ready to be delivered to other agencies, to the point that I never had a chance to learn about retouching. There were vague conversations of me trying to introduce some of the stuff I was learning at the course to the studio, but nothing ever came out of it. And I also realized in the most painful way possible of constantly messing up that I suck at admin type of work, and so I was getting nowhere. I did manage to improve some of the workflows in Photoshop at the studio, but the final project was looming heavy over me and I had to dedicate more time to my studies. I made just enough to get by and the work tapered off as the course came to an end. Around the same time, as fate would have it, my dad came into contact with my future boss. They've met at the pool, where my dad overheard a conversation about a studio looking for a photographer in London for a project. My dad passed on my contact details, but unfortunately it did not work out at first, as the project was almost finished and they already have found a photographer. However, they later reached out to me and asked if I could do some rotoscoping for a different project. It was a simple job that required me cutting out frames and supplying the finished frames back to them. So I jumped at the opportunity and completed the task to their satisfaction. We also agreed that I would visit them in Bristol if I'm ever in town. Unexpectedly, my work with the retouching agency has stopped abruptly, without any explanation. They told me they would contact me when they have work for me, but they never did. Eventually, I ran out of money and was forced to move back to Bristol to live with my parents. After the move, I went to the studio that I have mentioned before to say hi and to introduce myself. Fortunately, they had some work that needed to be done, and they liked me enough that they asked me to come back. And thus, I began my 2-week work experience with no money to my name. Work experience and my first job as a motion designer. Circumstances. From the very start, I was thrown into the deep end and I was learning how to swim from day one. Spoiler alert, I was learning how to swim for the next 2 years. I tried to introduce computational art to the studio and tapped into my knowledge of motion graphics to prove my skills. I was thrown into large projects and learned everything as I was working, picking up knowledge along the way and becoming really good at it. During that time, I was very fortunate to have worked on some really big and amazing projects, making motion graphics for big artists and making connections along the way. If you want to learn about the type of work that I do, head to my studio's website. You can find the link in the description down below. The importance of being nice to everyone that I've met during this time came in handy later on without me even realizing it, as this industry is run on knowing the right people. Also, I made sure to have a showreel of all my work ready, as I could sense a change in the wind around the studio, and soon enough I would have to learn the importance of reaching out to studios and keeping a close eye on other opportunities. Around this time, just before the pandemic, I doubled down my efforts of reaching out to other studios and seeing what's available on the market. And just as the pandemic hit, I got fired. I got my 5 weeks notice. The studio was kind enough to give me 1 extra week so I can find another job, and ironically offered help in assembling my showreel. I got extremely lucky and got fired at the right time, as I was already in the middle of discussing my start date with a new studio. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the trails went cold and I got quite few rejections. But all it took was one right opportunity at the right time. It turned out to be a blessing in disguise, and it felt like a massive weight was lifted off my shoulders. The studio, shortly after firing me, realized that I was the only one in the team who knew how to use Notch, and so they were frantically scrambling to get me to teach the other team member how to use it. They even tried to make me stay for extra 3 months, as they had a big project on the horizon that only I was capable of delivering. But having made up my mind and already having accepted the other studio's offer, I said no. And that made me realize that my work and skills have a tremendous amount of value without me even knowing it. And so, with my head held high, I started working at the new studio. Starting to work at a different studio. New opportunities. Having gained all of the knowledge from the previous studio, I was confident in my new position, and more importantly, I had an impactful showreel of all of my work that got me noticed. I knew that whatever came my way, I was ready for it, and if I didn't know something well, I was prepared to learn whatever I needed to get better at my job. My new boss was also interested in my Node skills and suggested I start having a look at Unreal Engine to see what I can do with it. So I began learning in between projects, getting more comfortable and better with it every day. There was already some tinkering that my boss was doing in Unreal Engine and asked me if I would be interested in trying to create a prototype of a virtual camera that linked with a real shoulder rig to have a look around virtual worlds, and from that moment on, I was hooked. I worked out a way to create preset lenses, camera controls and tracking that allowed us to do virtual production filming. It was at a time that virtual production was still in its relative infancy, and Disney Plus original Mandalorian was still making headlines, heralding virtual production as the next big thing in filmmaking. And this is where the crazy ride of virtual production began for me. I was staying in the office late, trying to figure out blueprints in Unreal Engine, hooking up all kinds of controls to a shoulder rig, trying to figure out live video streams from a camera to the engine and back out again to a screen. I was spending a lot of time in rented studios with green screens and all sorts of equipment, all on my own, trying to come up with tools that didn't exist yet. All of that hard work eventually paid off, and we were able to set up in-person virtual production demos in a studio with huge LED panels, projecting 3D environments in real time that adapted to the real-world camera position. And that landed our first serious project, the Channel 4 and HBO Max documentary Lucy, the Human Chimp. During the process, I've become really close with my team, forming friendships that continue to this day. I even recommended some of my colleagues and friends from the last studio I worked at. As well as working on new exciting projects and learning new skills, I knew my worth better and was able to climb the salary ladder rather quickly, using my skills and knowledge confidently as leverage, something that I was unable to do at the last studio. But as much as I was enjoying the cool and exciting work that I was doing, the Wild West type approach to the project was starting to take its toll on me. The long hours, haphazardly assembled 3D scenes that had to be pushed out quickly, and constant battling with loosely structured project management, and long, quiet periods that followed straight after, with no real organization or prospect clients in sight, began to look like big red flags to me. We saw a lot of people come and go, quickly getting burnt out by this way of working. So I did what my gut was telling me to do. Get that showreel ready and start looking for other options. I've already met enough of freelancers by this point to know that it can be done, and I could find work if I really wanted to. Having added a substantial amount of knowledge again, I knew that I would survive. All of those things combined gave me a clear idea. I want to become a freelancer. By this time, I was already talking to multiple companies and studios. And all of those clients that I've met at my last studio and I have emailed before leaving, yep, I was already having meetings with them too. And so the only thing left for me to do was to give in my 1 month notice. And just like that, I quit my job and jumped straight into freelancing. Look who came to visit. This little boy. Thank you, little clothes. Love you so much. Yes, you're so beautiful. And look, you're on camera. Vai pra cá, mamema. Vai pra cá. Isso. Fica aqui. The leap of faith to freelancing. Believe in oneself. Once I tied up all the loose ends with the studio and gave back all the projects and files that I had on my computer, I officially registered as self-employed and so began my grind in finding prospect clients. All the groundwork I did beforehand was already paying off, and I landed my first long-term client within the 2 weeks of quitting my job. What was great that this new client, who was in fact a studio, has worked with many freelancers over the years. They were super accommodating and even have given me suggestions here and there in terms of freelancing. And at the time they had so much work, I managed to stick around with them for 6 months, really helping me kickstart my freelancing journey, for which I'll be eternally grateful. I'm still continuing working with them until this day, as we formed a good relationship. I know I can get good compensation and solid work from them, and in return, they can rely on me to deliver good work in a timely and professional manner. I got to work on a variety of projects, from classic After Effects jobs to using Unreal Engine, creating entire virtual sets for virtual production. They even trusted me enough that I got to sit down and work directly with the clients, taking their input, making amends, and even going on site for a virtual production shoot to assist them there. Straight after this stretch of work, I jumped into another project with a client I knew from working on BTS Love Yourself tour from the United States. This is where I really felt that I've made the right decision to become a freelancer, because the project that they brought me on for was Old J. I couldn't believe it. I would be working on Old freaking J Worldwide Tour 2022. Don't get me wrong, I was super nervous, but also extremely excited as I knew I can do it and I had so many exciting ideas that I wanted to try out. The client was really open to all the different ideas from all the different artists, and there were about 11 of us, both internal and freelancers, located all over the world. It was the first time that I felt like I could really stretch my creative abilities and truly prove myself as an artist, working directly with a client, something I've always wanted to do. So not only was I finally working for myself, having more freedom and more income, I was no longer bound to any single location, as my work could be done fully remotely, as long as I had an internet connection. At this point, I was still living in Bristol, UK, but an idea had started brewing in my head. Should I try to live somewhere else now that I can do my work remotely? Other countries in Europe were certainly an option, but something else happened during that year. I've met my current partner, Flavio. I'll keep this part short, as the rest of the video is already fairly long. But if you want to find out the whole story, stay tuned to this channel as we're planning our first video as a couple very soon. Subscribe so you don't miss it. We've met online, and at the time he was living in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He's originally from Brazil and have moved to Argentina to study many years ago. We were not sure at the time who's going to move where. Is he coming to UK or am I going to move to Argentina? As with all things in life, things changed and he was offered a much better position within the same company in São Paulo, Brazil, and began arranging his move soon after. After we met for the first time in Croatia, we had a plan. I was already flirting with the idea of moving countries, so it seemed like a logical choice. And so for me, already have decided to move countries, I was happy to move to Brazil. And just like that, within 2 years, I was not only able to gain knowledge and increase my income, but also made one of the biggest decisions of my life to move continents, be with my partner, start learning a new language, and see new places. But besides that, nothing has really changed. I've continued successfully working with all of my clients and everything was business as usual. After about a year of working as a freelancer in Brazil, I was getting confused with all of the tax regulations and I had to make changes to the way that I operate. So my partner, who is an economist himself, suggested I start looking at opening a limited company and hiring an accounting firm to look after my finances. It was something I had on my mind for a while, but I could never quite push myself to do it. Most likely due to the fact that in my mind it was this big scary thing of running a business. But I finally made my mind up after a few months of mulling it over and finally made yet another jump into the unknown, something I've gotten used to doing by now. Opening Double Studio, achieving my dream and completing my 5-year plan. Around December time in 2022, as I was wrapping up projects for the year, I finally decided to kick off the process of registering my own company. Shockingly enough, the process was extremely easy. As a Brazilian resident, all I had to do was to get a digital signature for myself and another one for my business, and everything else was handled by the accounting firm. That's it. The only thing left for me was to choose the company name. And that was easy as well, because I already had an alias I've been using for a while, Double Studio. Long story short, it was a name I drafted up while still working at the first motion graphics studio in 2018, when I was living with my best mate and we were dreaming of opening our own business. Why Double Studio, you ask? Well, that's simple. Because it was the two of us and a nod to George Orwell's classic 1984, as our work would be double plus good. And so, I signed all the papers, put the business name down, and I was off to the races, operating as a creative studio ever since. Shortly after I've registered my business, I came across my 5-year plan from university while sifting through all the documents, and I almost cried. Sure, I was 1 year behind my outlined timeline, but I did almost everything in my plan and in the end have opened a creative agency. I couldn't believe that I followed my passion to the letter and it worked out exactly how I planned when I was 22 years old when leaving the university. Perhaps the best part about owning a business is having very clear lines between me and the work that I do, both financially and psychologically. That gives me the space to separate myself from my work and allows me to grow as an artist. As an example, having all of my finances managed and monitored by the accounting firm, I have the headspace to focus on my studies that I've started recently. I've decided that I want to get better at 3D animation, and so I've decided to do another postgrad in animation and 3D modeling. The course is taught fully in Portuguese and so has an added benefit of me learning the language in the context of creative work. That will allow me to further expand my business outreach and give me the language tools to communicate my ideas clearly without things getting lost in translation. Owning a business also allowed me to start this YouTube channel, giving me yet another opportunity to expand my knowledge in filming, editing and color grading side. I have started learning DaVinci Resolve through live online classes, allowing me to add yet another side to the things I can offer as a studio. With careful planning, I can fit around my working days and hours to travel, taking my laptop with me so I can work while enjoying everything that South America has to offer. And that brings us to the end of my journey, from getting sick as a kid and discovering motion graphics to finally founding a creative agency. Thank you for tuning in, and if you want to learn more about my journey, feel free to leave a comment below, check out my studio's website, and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And if you're on a similar path, I wish you all the best on your own journey towards success. Thank you so much again, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao, ciao.